Welcome to CounterPoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. We're going to the polls on September 20th. This past weekend, the Prime Minister spoke with the Governor General, Mary Simon, and the government has officially been dissolved. Politicians are shaking hands and kissing babies. Wait, no, they're not. It's COVID. No one's doing any of that anymore. This election will be very different than those we've seen previously, with less in-person and more digital communications, ads, and even Zoom town halls. But pay attention. This all matters. There are serious issues in this election, and we may have a new or a slightly different government within a few short weeks. So just how is the campaign trail going so far? What issues are emerging? What do the numbers indicate? And what are Canadians saying? Well, every week I will be bringing you the latest analysis with an election panel. And joining me now to unpack all of the election-related issues and events is Anthony Furey, columnist and editor for Sun Papers, and Elliot Hughes, senior advisor with Summa Strategies and former advisor to Liberal Defence and Finance Minister. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm eager to dive right in. So let's just do that. I think the first thing I saw that kind of piqued my interest was actually before the election call happened, which was on Sunday, was this new Conservative Party ad that has now been coined the Willy Wonka ad. I take it you both have seen it?
Yes.
Okay, Elliot, maybe you start us off. What were your thoughts with this? This has caused a lot of kerfuffle on social media for sure.
Yeah, I wonder if that was actually the point of it. Aaron O'Toole is still, frankly, I think building his bona fides with the Conservative base, and I think this was a little bit of a, let's throw a bone to the Conservative base who wants to, in a sense, punch Trudeau in the face, obviously not physically, but in another way, and sort of just get the base riled up. I think Aaron O'Toole has struggled making sure that the base is fully behind him. And I think this ad was actually mostly for the Conservative base rather than regular Canadians. I think it's now, been taken down by Twitter, if I'm not mistaken, because of copyright issues. In a sense, that helps him because it keeps generating a little bit of chatter around this ad. So in a way, I thought it was effective if the purpose was to energize the base and not get voters to vote for Aaron O'Toole.
Okay, Anthony, do you have any particular take on this Willy Wonka ad? And for those of you viewers who didn't see it, I guess Google it if it's still up. It sounds like it's been taken down. Anthony, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have any particular take on that. I think Elliot makes a good point. If the sort of candidate gaffes are 24-hour news stories, then like a video just put to Twitter is what, a 12-hour, 6-hour, 3-hour news story. Probably wasn't something I'd released, but then again, some people got a chuckle out of it, and it was never actually meant for sort of broader distribution. They didn't do television buys with it or whatnot. It was just a little Twitter video. So I think Elliot has a point.
Okay, well, I did see it, and I remember at first thinking, oh, this could be good, and then it kind of went a little off the rails, in my opinion. But I thought, hey, there's so much chatter now in the Twitter sphere, in the blogosphere, in the print media about this ad that perhaps, to your point, Elliot, that it is exactly what was intended, which is to kind of put O'Toole on the map and say, hey, this is the leader of the party, and they're here. And perhaps it was with this, wayward digital ad, I don't know, but a lot of people are talking who weren't talking previously about O'Toole, so I think there's some merit in that. They say all media is good media, even the bad stuff, so there you go. I want to talk a little bit about Afghanistan, and we have about a minute before break, and obviously this is a major issue, and we'll be covering this more in depth on a separate show, but Afghanistan is really hitting a boiling point. The Taliban have now seized control of Kabul. People are desperate to evacuate the airport. Who's controlling it now? It sounds like it's still it's not safe for people to be evacuated now. How will, and I'll start with you, Anthony, in the 45 minutes we have left, how will Afghanistan factor into this issue? It seems to be more of an American issue, but how will it affect in Canadian politics?
Well, it'll play massively, I think, for days to come, because like in the 2015 election, the Syrian refugee crisis, I don't think anyone planned it in their playbooks to be what they would focus on, but it became dominant for a good week or two. And one particular image, tragically, of a toddler who's washed up on shore that really got people talking about refugees. In a similar situation here, images of people clinging onto airplanes and people falling off of those airplanes, 9/11 sort of level imagery, very disturbing stuff. People are now pressing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying, well, hold on a second. I mean, didn't you have weeks to prepare for this? Why couldn't you have done more to help evacuate these people? What are the plans?
Welcome back. We're on with an election panel. Joining me is Anthony Furey and Elliot Hughes. Just before the previous commercial break, we were discussing the role Afghanistan will play, or the issue of what's happening in Afghanistan will play in this election. Anthony, you brought up some excellent points. People are asking questions, and I agree. They're asking questions as to why the government, our Canadian government, wasn't prepared for the withdrawal of the American troops. What were we doing to get our people out, who I believe are predominantly stuck on the ground there? Elliot, would you shed some light on this? How big of an election issue will this be? Will this down the Liberals?
Well, I think I will differ, in this point than Anthony. I don't think it will. I think that, let's be clear, the images that are coming out of Afghanistan at the moment and that everyone are seeing are terrible. And the situation on the ground is awful. I don't think that this will resonate politically and at the doors. I know that may sound a bit crass, but I think right now people are obviously seeing those images, but I don't quite think that there is a tie back to Liberal government. We need to remember that, this has been, we've been there 20 years, there's a broader coalition there. And frankly, what did we expect was going to happen when we go in and invade a country and try and take it over? Those tend to end messy. And what we're seeing is messy. But the fact of the matter is, the facts on the ground are, the U.S. is the king of the roost there. Mm-hmm. And if they sort of start to get caught on their back heels and aren't in control of the situation, other allies, including Canada, are going to be at the whim of their ability to take control. Now, that seems to be shifting a little bit, and the U.S. are gaining a bit more control. But getting back to the original point, I do not think that this will translate into a downward trend for the Liberals at the voting booth on September 20th.
I think it actually, as to sound like I'm sitting on the fence, I think it'd go either way. I think you brought up a fair point there, Elliot, that many Canadians are, and again, not to diminish what's happening in Afghanistan, but are probably distracted right now. Many areas in Canada have just come out of a COVID lockdown, preparing to probably enter a fourth as October approaches. People are wondering what back to school looks like for their children, for their grandchildren. There are many, many distractions. And frankly, after all these months of lockdown, Canadians are kind of getting out and socializing, something that seems so foreign these days. So there is definitely a distraction. That aside, there are many Canadians who never thought perhaps we should have been in Afghanistan to begin with. And, if Justin Trudeau doesn't play this right, some of that voting bloc may come back to bite. We'll have to see. It's definitely something to keep, as things develop, I think we would have to revisit the Afghanistan issue. One other thing that has come to mind is obviously this is a COVID election. Things are going to be very different. I feel like I'm revisiting the 2020 U.S. election cycle, but we're going to talk about mail-in ballots. That's going to be a thing. Anthony, what are your thoughts on mail-in ballots? What factor do you think and role do you think they will be playing?
Well, I think there was a lot of headaches and a lot of questions around mail-in ballots, the timing of them when they were due in the U.S. election. And of course, there was counting of them that happened late at night, which is what I think stoked a lot of people to say, well, hold on a second, can we question the accuracy? And whatever you think of what went on in the American election, the whole thing was kind of a mess in those last couple of days, and it sort of fed a lot of uncertainty. Elections Canada does seem to have a pretty rigorous setup in terms of how one applies for the mail-in ballots and so forth. But I also think, to your point, though, Tanya, people have been getting out and about more. They've been just going to more stores. They've been seeing more people. So this idea that it might be unsafe to wait in a socially distanced lineup, that's probably a lot of it's going to be outdoors on September 20th, bring your umbrellas in case it's raining. Oh. I think most people are just going to show up to vote because generally speaking, we have a pretty efficient voting system in Canada. I've been someone who's been saying for the past year that we don't need many of the tight restrictions we have. So I'm not going to turn around and say it's irresponsible to have this election right now or it's unsafe or whatnot. And I think people are feeling that as well. So I don't think there'll be as big of a mail-in take rate as perhaps some people are expecting.
Elliot, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I tend to agree. One benefit of the mail-in, though, is perhaps for the people who in the past haven't been out to vote, maybe if there's a bit of an increased focus on the ability for them to actually use mail-in ballots, for there to be more advertising, for campaigns to take it a bit more seriously in terms of their get out the vote strategy, perhaps that might actually lead to some people who've been sitting on the sidelines or haven't decided to get into those lines and vote to actually vote. So I think in COVID aside, this actually could be a beneficial, but I would tend to agree with Anthony. I think this great fear that no one's going to go to the ballot box and vote in person is a bit overblown. But I do think largely, broadly speaking, the increase in mail-in ballots could actually be a positive thing for democratic engagement around Canada.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break, but I do want to tie up this little part of mail-in ballots right when we return. Please stick around. Welcome back. It's election time, and joining me to unpack it all is Anthony Furey and Elliot Hughes. Just before the break, we were discussing mail-in ballots and what kind of role it will play in this federal election. I want to approach things from more of a political standpoint, and let's just boil it right down. If there is this uptick in mail-in ballots, that more people are voting who previously hadn't, I'm going to ask both of you, who's going to benefit from that? Will it be the NDP, the CPC, some of the smaller parties, the Liberal? Who's to benefit from that? Elliot, who do you think will benefit from that upsurge?
I'll keep it short. I think it might tend to favor conservative voters, but I don't think it's going to favor them enough to tip the scales in any serious way. I just don't know if the numbers are going to be there across the country, maybe in one or two ridings perhaps, but I guess I first need to see the evidence that this is going to happen in this election, and then maybe for the next election we can start to determine and say that it actually does potentially tip the scales one way or another.
Anthony?
Yeah, I'd agree. I will just add, I'm sort of against mail-in ballots and online voting on the principle of voting being a sort of sacred process, and that, once every 4 years or what have you, you show up in person, you make the effort. It's a communal civil society experience. I'm not against, for mobility reasons for disabled persons and so forth, providing options, but I don't want it to be sent out there as this added incentive for people who can't really be bothered to vote in the first place. Yeah,
that's a fair point. I think I might tend to agree with you on that, Anthony, is that for me, voting was definitely sacred. I remember when I think I had to wait till I was 20 to vote in an election because the years didn't line up properly when I turned 18. But it is a very important process, and I think a lot of questions will be asked around ID verification. What sort of verification will there be for mail-in ballots? Will there be fraud? I mean, again, this is going to be an evolving issue I can see playing out in the next several weeks, perhaps even after the election, because who knows how long it'll take to wrap up perhaps a very huge surge of ballots. Some are estimating 5 million Canadians will be voting by mail. So for me, it's a lot about fraud and making sure that actual Canadians who are allowed to vote are the ones voting, and making sure that the winner, that we all have confidence in the system. So go ahead.
Can I just say, I would tend to disagree. I think trying to make voting more accessible is actually the better way to go. We use banking technology through our phones. You can apply for mortgages through your phones. You can get a passport through your phones. Security on those activities is extremely important, supremely important. It's proven that it can work. Why not be able to think about the option of being able to do mobile voting through your phone or other ways of accessing people who perhaps, because they live far from voting stations or can't make themselves available to go to the polls. I think we should be able to try to make this as easy as possible to vote.
Look, and I'm all for encouraging more voters. Look, I live in a very rural riding in Canada, and it takes me, a long time on a highway to get to vote, relatively speaking. That being said, those examples you gave, banking and various sectors, I mean, they have months and months and months, maybe years to prepare for some kind of rollout like that. I'm just curious to see if Elections Canada has got their act together this quickly. I mean, we don't have, like the Americans do, that have this protracted election process where we know the date it's happening, we're ready to go. I guess I'm just questioning whether we'll be ready to make sure that we don't have international interference or there are other unsavory agents interfering with our election, that people who actually are allowed to vote will. And I guess that, speaking of timelines, maybe that boils down to why have the election now in the first place? And this is, interestingly, I don't recall an election ever. I mean, we've had other minority governments. We've had other elections. I remember the 2000s, how many, one after the other. We had so many minority governments. But people seem to be asking more now than I've seen before is, why now? Why are we having this election now? Elliot, what do you think the reaction will be, or do you think this is benefiting Justin Trudeau as he leads the Liberals in this election?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question to ask. Look, I mean, the parliament that we just came out of and that just dissolved still had about 2 more years to run. There were some challenges there, but that's typical disagreements between parties. What I think the fair argument is while we may be entering in a 4th wave, we are definitely moving through and probably on the back end of COVID, hopefully, with vaccination rates being high. So that means that we need to begin thinking about what comes next now, not waiting until next comes and then thinking about what's next when we're already there.
Right.
So I actually think this election makes a lot of sense in terms of the timing. You vote on who you want to be in charge of the country, to be making the decisions in the next 3, 6 months, year or 2, because those decisions are going to set Canada on that path forward and what we're going to be focusing on, what kind of economy we're going to have. So I think it actually makes a lot of sense to have it now, rather than waiting until we're finally out of it, then saying, okay, let's decide what comes next. Let's get that plan in place. Let's ask Canadians what they want and who they want leading them into that next phase.
Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion with our election panel. Anthony Furey and Elliot Hughes have joined me. Before the break, we were discussing whether this was the right time to call an election. A lot of Canadians are saying, why now? We're in the middle of a COVID drama. Why are we even going to the polls? Obviously, the decision was on Justin Trudeau's shoulders alone. He's the one who had to go and call the election. And now we have the NDP and other people chiming in saying, no, this is not the right time. Anthony, is this going to help or hurt the Liberals' chances at getting that coveted majority?
Well, it all depends really what happens in the next few weeks, because with Afghanistan, we've seen that events can get in the way. And we don't know what exactly is going to happen with COVID, what's going to happen with the debates and the process around mandatory vaccines. Justin Trudeau initially said, yes, it's going to be enforced for federal workers. And then you realize there's some exemptions. You go, okay, it's not really all that far apart from Aaron O'Toole's perspective. And I think Elliot made a good point before the break that this is really almost a referendum on where do we want to head, post the worst of COVID, getting out of this. And Justin Trudeau, in response to one question, I think it was from Tanya McCharles at Toronto Star at one of the press conferences, he actually said, look, this is about whether or not we want to build back better. I think he did use the phrase reset at some point in his answer. I mean, he's basically being pretty open, saying he has a perspective, an agenda that he wants to sell to the people. I know he doesn't like the phrase the Great Reset, but, Bank of Canada documents, and I think it's even on the Prime Minister's website at one press release. I mean, this is kind of, what he's pushing for, this idea of sort of remaking the Canadian economy in a greener way, in a way more consistent with those reset conversations that people are having. And I credit him with being open about that. I do not think that's the direction the country should be heading in. I think life was pretty good just a year and a half ago, and I think most Canadians want to return to that. But it's good that he's being transparent about, let's have this referendum on which way do we want to head. Well,
interesting. It seems like the one issue that both the leader and the opposition, so Trudeau and Aaron O'Toole, seem to have sort of agreed on is vaccines. They seem to at one point have a very similar position, and Aaron O'Toole was calling out. And I want to talk about this because this kind of was an issue that just broke recently, where Aaron O'Toole said, hey, Justin Trudeau, your policy on mandatory vaccine for federal workers, well, it's not much different than the one I'm proposing. In fact, we're the same. I'm echoing and I support. So don't suggest that we're different. We're actually the same. And the Conservative Party held up a document published by the Treasury Board Secretariat, which when Trudeau, I guess, called it out, it was promptly removed from a government website. And people are calling foul. In fact, somebody said this is a serious breach of the Caretaker Convention, in that you have the bureaucracy, like the government should not be interfering or not taking cues from messaging within an election. Is this going to be a big deal? Is this an ethics breach? Elliot, I'll start with you.
Well, I don't think the discrepancy between Trudeau's position on this and the Treasury Board message that was sent out will become an ethics issue. But I do think the mandatory vaccines will remain as an issue throughout the rest of this campaign, for sure. We're gonna see this again, probably come up when schools get started again. Mm-hmm. We're gonna see this, throughout the entire time of COVID. I think it's something that is going to be reoccurring, and it's going to be in the background. I think largely Canadians seem to favor vaccine mandates, obviously with some exceptions, particularly medical ones. So it'll be interesting to see and watch over the course of the next couple of weeks, do Canadians react and sort of see where both parties are going, where both leaders sort of claim that they're different, or do they just call it a draw and that doesn't end up affecting the vote? But I think either way, this will be something that we'll be talking about not only on day 2, but probably on day 36 as well.
Okay, Anthony, 30 seconds before we have to go. The vaccine mandates, this allegedly pulling down of the letter from the Treasury Board Secretariat. What are your thoughts?
Trudeau wants to position Aaron O'Toole as some anti-vaxxer, but that's just not the case. There's a lot of people, myself included, I got the 2 doses, but I don't support mandatory vaccines. I don't support domestic vaccine passports. So I don't know how you can call people who got the vaccine anti-vaxxers. And Aaron O'Toole is clearly someone in that situation. He just doesn't support the sort of more extreme measures, the sort of government coercion policies.
Okay, lots to unpack. We're going to have a lot more next week when we have our panel back. But thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks very much.
Have a good day. That was a fast-paced discussion, but you got to be fast-paced. We're in the middle of an election, and issues are going to be flying at us, and we're going to have to digest them all here at CounterPoint on the news forum. So come back next week where we'll have our elections panel again, and we'll bring you the latest and the greatest from the campaign trail. For CounterPoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.